You're 40 minutes into a ride, deep in the kind of gravel section where your phone has no signal, and your front tire hits a sharp rock at the wrong angle. If you're running tubes, you already know what happens next. A sharp hiss, the bike wobbling under you, and that slow, sinking realization that you're about to spend the next 15 minutes on the side of the road with tire levers and cold fingers. If you're running tubeless, the sealant inside the tire is supposed to plug that hole before you even notice it happened. That single moment, more than any marketing campaign, is why so many riders have made the switch. But here's what almost nobody tells you before you make that decision. Tubeless isn't the flawless upgrade it's sold as, and inner tubes aren't the outdated technology the industry wants you to believe they are. The story you've probably heard goes something like this. Tubes are old, heavy, and prone to pinch flats. Tubeless is the modern solution, ridden by every serious mountain biker and, increasingly, every serious road cyclist. And if you're still running tubes, you're leaving performance and reliability on the table. It's a clean narrative, repeated in shop windows and YouTube reviews, and the group chat where someone always insists you'll never go back once you switch. It's also only part of the truth. To understand how we got here, it helps to look at where tubeless actually came from, because the origin story explains a lot about why the technology behaves the way it does today. The concept didn't start in cycling at all. Automotive tires went tubeless decades earlier, largely because a punctured tubeless car tire tends to lose air slowly rather than blowing out, which is a serious safety advantage at highway speed. Motocross racers adapted a version of that idea to cut down on the pinch flats that plagued aggressive off-road riding, since a tube trapped between a rim and a rock at speed is a recipe for a sudden, violent flat. Mountain biking picked up the concept in the late 1990s, when Mavic and Michelin partnered to launch the UST standard in 1999, a system built around a specific rim and tire bead profile engineered to hold air without a tube at all. Early UST tires didn't need sealant to function, but they were heavy. The tolerances between rim and tire were tight enough that not every combination worked reliably, and the whole system was expensive relative to a standard tube setup. Riders who wanted the benefit without the weight penalty needed a different approach. That's where the tubeless with sealant setup that dominates today, often labeled tubeless ready, or TLR, actually came from. It emerged as a lighter, more forgiving alternative to true UST, and Stan's no tubes played a major role in popularizing the sealant-based approach for mountain bikers in the early 2000s, effectively converting standard clincher rims into a tubeless-capable system with tape, a valve, and liquid sealant, instead of a dedicated beadlock design. Road tubeless followed years later, and more slowly, with Hutchinson introducing one of the first road tubeless tire and rim systems around 2006. It took nearly another decade for the broader industry, and eventually the professional peloton, to start treating road tubeless as a serious option, rather than a niche product for a small group of early adopters. That slow adoption curve is itself a clue worth paying attention to. If tubeless were a strict, no downside upgrade, professional teams with unlimited budgets and full-time mechanics would have switched over almost immediately. Instead, it took roughly 15 years of refinement before it became a mainstream choice at the highest level of the sport. And even now, you'll find pros who choose their setup race by race, depending on the course. So the technology has a real, credible engineering lineage. It wasn't invented by a marketing department chasing an upsell, but the way it's sold to everyday riders today has drifted a long way from those original engineering goals, and that's where the cracks in the narrative start to show. Start with the flat protection itself, because this is the #1 reason people switch in the first place. Sealant genuinely works, and it works well against the small punctures that plague tube setups constantly. Thorns, small glass, the occasional staple in a bike lane, a stray goat head thorn on a gravel path. Liquid latex sealant rushes to the hole under the tire's internal pressure, gets pushed into the gap, and cures fast enough that a lot of riders never even feel the puncture happen mid-ride. That part of the promise is real and well documented. What doesn't get mentioned nearly as often is that sealant is a consumable not a permanent fix, and it behaves less like a one-time investment and more like engine oil that needs regular attention. Most sealants dry out inside the tire over a period of roughly 2 to 4 months, depending on climate, tire porosity, and how often the bike sits parked in direct sun or a hot garage. Ride on dried out sealant, which happens to more riders than the industry likes to admit, and you have all the tubeless setup's added weight and mechanical complexity with none of the protection it's actually supposed to provide. You're essentially running a heavier, harder to fix tube setup and calling it tubeless. Sealant also has real physical limits on what it can plug, and those limits matter more than the marketing suggests. A clean, small puncture, sure, sealant handles that beautifully, but a sidewall slice, a large gash from a sharp rock strike, or a pinch-style cut from an underinflated tire bottoming out hard on a rim edge, and sealant often can't keep up with the volume of air escaping. In those situations, tubeless riders end up doing exactly what tube riders do: stopping, digging through a saddlebag for a plug kit, or, more often than people expect, a spare tube anyway, because plugging a large gash on the trail doesn't always hold. The difference is that a tubeless failure in the field is frequently messier and slower to diagnose than a straightforward tube flat, because you're dealing with a tire that's already losing air fast, sealant slung across the rim, spokes, and your hands, and a decision to make about whether to try to plug it or just give up and install a tube inside the tubeless tire on the spot, which is its own fiddly process most riders have never practiced before they actually need it. Then there's the installation and ongoing maintenance side, which almost nobody puts front and center in a buying decision, even though it's arguably the biggest lifestyle difference between the two systems. Mounting a tubeless tire for the first time often requires a compressor or a dedicated high-volume tubeless pump to get the bead to seat with the audible pop you're listening for, because a standard hand pump frequently doesn't move air fast enough to force the bead into place before it leaks back out. Rim tape has to sit perfectly with no wrinkles or gaps. Valve stems have to seal cleanly against the rim bed, and a rim and tire combination that's even slightly out of published spec can leave you fighting for 20 minutes to get air to hold it all, sealant spraying out through the bead the whole time. None of this is impossible, and plenty of riders get comfortable with it after doing it a handful of times. But it's a meaningfully higher bar of mechanical involvement and specialized equipment than pulling a tube out of a box and inflating it with a floor pump, and the ongoing maintenance doesn't stop once the initial setup is done. Sealant needs to be topped up on a schedule, typically every few months. Tires need to be broken down and cleaned out periodically because dried sealant forms rubbery clumps and boogers inside the casing that can throw off wheel balance at speed and, in some documented cases, actually clog future punctures from sealing properly because the fresh sealant can't reach bare rubber past the old residue. That's real time, real cost, and a real skill investment that rarely shows up in the 5-minute pitch you hear at the shop counter when you're buying a new wheel set. Here's where the myth really starts to wobble, though: the weight argument, which is one of the most repeated and least scrutinized claims in this entire debate. Tubeless is often marketed as the lighter option, and in a narrow apples-to-apples sense, a tubeless tire without a tube can be lighter than the same tire with a tube inside it. But that comparison quietly leaves out the sealant, which typically adds somewhere in the range of 60 to 120 grams per tire, depending on tire volume and how recently it was topped up, along with tubeless specific rim tape and a valve, both of which add weight a standard clincher setup doesn't carry at all. Once you add all of that back into the equation, honestly, the total weight difference between a well set up tubeless system and a modern lightweight tube, especially a latex or TPU tube, shrinks dramatically, and in some setups, it essentially disappears entirely. Riders chasing every gram on a race bike sometimes end up genuinely surprised after actually putting both setups on a scale that their supposedly lighter tubeless setup isn't meaningfully lighter at all than the tube and tire combination they replaced, especially once you factor in that many mountain bikers also run a tire insert, like CushCore inside their tubeless tire for extra rim protection and stability at low pressure, which adds back a substantial chunk of weight that erases most or all of the original savings. Now for the layer underneath all of this that doesn't get talked about nearly enough, the pressure question, and why it matters more than most people realize when they're deciding which system actually suits them. One of Tubeless's genuine, well-earned advantages is that it lets riders run lower tire pressures without the pinch-flat risk that comes from a tube getting squeezed between the tire and rim on a hard hit, sometimes called a snakebite flat because of the 2 puncture holes it leaves in the tube. Lower pressure means a larger contact patch, better traction on loose or technical terrain, and a noticeably smoother ride on rough surfaces. And that's a real, measurable benefit for mountain biking and gravel riding in particular, one that shows up consistently in independent rolling resistance and comfort testing. But running tubeless at very low pressure introduces a different failure mode entirely: burping, where a hard enough impact briefly unseats part of the tire bead from the rim and lets air escape in a rush, sometimes enough to drop you from riding pressure to nearly flat in a single hit. It's not the same failure as a pinch flat, and it doesn't happen nearly as often, but it's not nothing either. And it tends to happen at exactly the worst possible moment, mid-corner or mid-descent, when you're counting on that tire holding its shape and traction the most. And then there's the part of this conversation that's uncomfortable to say out loud, but worth saying anyway, because it changes how you should weigh the advice you're hearing. A meaningful part of Tubeless's dominance in the current market isn't just about performance, it's also about where the industry actually makes its money. Tubeless systems tend to require riders to replace rim tape, buy sealant on a recurring basis, and in a lot of cases, purchase entire wheel sets built around specific hookless or tubeless optimized bead profiles, all of which are recurring or one-time purchases that a simple tube setup simply doesn't generate for the shop or the brand. Hookless rim design in particular has become its own quiet controversy in the last few years, with some manufacturers imposing lower maximum pressure limits and a narrower list of approved tire models for safety reasons, which ties riders more tightly into a specific ecosystem of parts than a traditional hooked rim and tube setup ever did. None of this makes tubeless a scam or a bad faith choice. The engineering benefits for the right rider in the right terrain are genuinely real, well documented, and not seriously disputed among independent testers and engineers. But it does mean the loudest voices telling you tubeless is strictly better for absolutely everyone have a financial incentive baked into that message. And it's worth knowing that before you spend the money and an entire weekend afternoon getting your first tubeless setup to seat properly in your garage, there's also a cost picture that rarely gets laid out honestly, and it's worth walking through in plain numbers rather than vague impressions. A basic butyl inner tube typically costs a fraction of what a bottle of tubeless sealant costs, and that sealant bottle gets used up and needs replacing every few months across every tire on the bike, season after season. Add in tubeless specific rim tape, a pair of tubeless valves, and potentially a tire insert for extra protection, and the true first-year cost of a tubeless setup on a single bike can end up higher than most riders expect walking into the shop. Even before accounting for the compressor or high-volume pump, a lot of riders end up buying just to get tires to seat reliably at home. None of that spending is wasted if the system solves a real problem for how you ride, but it's a genuine ongoing cost, not the one-time upgrade purchase it's often framed as. There's a climate wrinkle too, that catches a lot of riders off guard the first time it happens to them. Liquid sealant behaves differently in cold weather, and in genuinely freezing temperatures, it can thicken or partially freeze inside the tire, reducing how effectively it flows to seal a fresh puncture right when winter road, grit, and debris make punctures more likely in the first place. Riders in colder climates sometimes switch to tube setups for winter, specifically because a tube's performance doesn't change with the weather the way sealant chemistry does, then switch back to tubeless once the temperatures come back up in spring. That kind of seasonal flexibility rarely makes it into a tubeless sales pitch, but it's a real practical consideration for anyone who rides year-round somewhere with a genuine winter. So where does that leave you, practically, once you strip away the marketing on both sides? If you're riding technical mountain bike trails, aggressive gravel, or anywhere sharp rocks and thorns are a constant and predictable threat, Tubeless earns its keep and then some. The ability to run lower pressure and shrug off the small, constant punctures that would otherwise end your ride every other weekend is a genuine field-tested advantage. And most serious off-road riders who've made the switch don't go back to tubes for that kind of terrain. If you're commuting, doing casual road riding, or you're simply the kind of rider who wants to fix a flat in 5 minutes at the side of the road without owning a compressor or a specific tubeless plug kit, a good quality tube, ideally a lightweight latex or TPU tube paired with a genuinely puncture-resistant tire casing, is still a completely legitimate lower maintenance choice that a lot of experienced riders quietly still prefer, even after trying tubeless themselves. Even some professional road racers, at various points and on specific stages, have stuck with tubulars or high-end tubes over tubeless, specifically because of how predictably they behave under race day pressure, when a mechanical failure costs far more than a few extra grams ever could. That mid-ride moment I opened with, the one where your tire hits a rock and either seals itself instantly or leaves you stranded on the side of the trail, isn't really an argument for one system being universally correct for every rider on every surface. It's a reminder that the right setup depends entirely on where and how you actually ride, how much maintenance you're genuinely willing to keep up with, and how much specialized equipment you're willing to own, not on which system happens to have the louder marketing campaign this particular season. If you've been putting off switching to tubeless because you weren't sure it was worth the hassle, or you've been quietly thinking about going back to tubes because your tubeless setup has caused more trouble than it's solved, drop a comment and tell us which one you're running right now and why, because the actual split within this community is a lot closer than the industry wants you to believe. The honest answer, the one that doesn't sell a single extra bottle of sealant or a single tube, is that neither system is the universal upgrade it's marketed as. Tubeless solves real problems for riders who face real, frequent puncture risk and want the traction benefits of lower pressure. And it introduces real maintenance, real cost, and a real learning curve that tube riders simply never have to deal with. Tubes remain simple, predictable, and easy to service on the side of the trail with tools most riders already own. And modern lightweight tubes have closed a lot of the performance gap that used to make them the clear inferior choice a decade ago. The truth nobody wants to admit is a lot less exciting than a clean, one-sided verdict. It isn't tubeless versus tubes as a matter of principle. It's matching the system to the terrain you actually ride and being brutally honest with yourself about how much maintenance you're actually willing to do on a Sunday afternoon. Next time, we're pulling apart another cycling debate that gets flattened into a single, obvious winner every time it comes up online. So if you want to see where that one actually lands, once you dig into the details, stick around for what's coming next.